All right, I'm gonna ping you, Dr. Anderson. Thanks for everyone. Okay, folks. Thanks for coming or watching the Fiyah Literary Magazine author interview. We're here with Dr. Anderson, who is head dog in charge of the Black Speculative Arts Movement, and also put together the text we're going to discuss today is Afrofuturism 2.0. So Dr. Anderson, some of the things I allow the people to do is instead of me giving you, praises and telling everybody how amazing you are, I think it's interesting when writers or like even just like academics like talk about themselves a little bit. So yeah, can you tell the folks, out in the world, who you are and what you're a little bit about?
Okay, my name is Reynaldo Anderson. Uh, Pronouns he, him. I'm an associate professor of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University, and the primary organizer for the Black Speculative Arts Movement, which is now an international network of activists and scholars and artists that was started roughly around 2016 or so and is now on all four continents in over a dozen countries. And it's thriving pretty well. It's a movement that's actually based on scholarship. Um, and so we got a couple of big, I'm supposed to be talking in Ottawa, Canada, end of this or next weekend about these ideas. We're in Ottawa, and then towards the end of the semester, we have a big international Black Speculative meeting in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And so the movement's humming along and it continues to grow and looks different depending on where you are. I was talking to our host, and thank you for inviting me here, that how Afrofuturism looks and moves depending on the country. And it's all pizza, but pizza in Brazil is different from pizza in America, is different from pizza in France. So, and so our ideas and concepts are flexible enough and reflect those local worldviews and how it engages and is in conversation with each other.
Thanks, Dr. Anderson. Yeah, and I think that's what's really I think what's important about what you're saying is that things are changing. Right when we come up with the terminology for something, it's already shifting towards the next thing.
Hmm.
And so what we're doing here is trying to capture that moment as well and also like contend with what's coming, even though we don't quite know it yet,
Oh, yeah.
the prediction of it. So that's all, that's our Dr. Anderson expanding Afrofuturism with other folks outside of just the more popular things that we know it as.
Hmm.
And also how it's kind of marketed towards us, which is like why I thought this would be an interesting conversation. We had Black Panther era
Yeah.
or still having it. And after Chadwick passed away, I feel like it ramped up a little bit. And that was like I mean, maybe it was already headed in this direction, but I feel like once he passed away, it really took on. They had like a monitor sort of to like back this Disney machine a little bit. It wasn't just like
Well,
getting all
that
the
was
latest
going to
people.
be. I guess I wouldn't be violating my non-disclosure agreement. I could check with him whatever, but actually, I was working on the last project that Chadwick was working on. Him and his partner Logan was with me before they passed, looking at a project based upon the ideas within 2.0. And I'll never forget the day his partner called me and said, "Hey, man, something's wrong with Chadwick." And then later got the news. I mean, we had put together the proposal and everything, and because Chadwick had looked at my stuff and really liked it, and so I guess we'll never know, in terms of what would happen, advancing it beyond. Because I think that's what Chadwick was into. He understood Panther as an entertainment vehicle, but then going forward, he wanted to base it on some hardcore scholarly stuff that we had been doing. And now it looks like that, at least for now, the time being, look like it's not going to happen. And I guess I can't give away any more details like that unless I get
LOL.
permission. But that's
Yeah.
just.
I mean, I think that's a good point you made too, for folks who are interested in Afrofuturism in a scholarly point, or even just relating how their work fit into like a larger scholarly text. can
Yeah,
you use that as an entry point? Like these, like there's going to always be popular things. There's always going to be things or symbols that people initially associate with things. But then, like, how does your work expand upon or clarify or like that what's already there to the norm?
yeah.
And so, yeah, I feel like that's some like what you're talking about, which is like kind of really brilliant to be able to put yourself in this position to one, do something that may not be like the 100% best idea or like, that you love, but you realize that this is the moment, the jumping off point, for something larger than you in this project that you're even a
The
part of.
key, the key thing you meant jumping off point for something larger. I remember as a graduate student in the 90s at the University of Nebraska coming across the term Afrofuturism during like the Web 1.0 era, where you had the online discussion groups. And at the time, I was an emerging Black Panther scholar. That was my dissertation was based on that. And I kind of kept up with some of the discussions. I didn't know Mark Derry and Alondra Nelson and them personally, but I kind of kept up with it because I was until the beginning of this century. There was an article, I think it was Peniel Joseph that wrote it. I was in a part of this article, and they were considering me among a new generation of Black power scholars. I think it was written by Peniel Joseph because of the work we had done on the Black Panther Party. But one of the things where I moved beyond that, it was actually the politics of the Obama campaign made me move beyond that, those body of ideas, because the key jumping off point or transition, I would say, was my father had spent a generation studying our family heritage, going back through records and records back into the 19th century. And we discovered where our African heritage was. And so we made a pilgrimage to Africa in '08. So this is like weeks after Obama's victory, we're in Cameroon, going through meeting people where our ancestors are from. And then a couple of factors, as I've written, I think is in the book Cosmic Underground. You got if you can remember, you had the '08 economic crash. Within months of that, you had the emergence of the Tea Party movement, and then Obama using NATO to bomb Libya, and of course, this is the era of social media, the Trayvon Martin incident. And that is when myself and some other scholars then, and it's funny how swiftly time passed, decided that the politics of Black liberals was not going to be enough to move the community forward in terms of, it's time for us to come up with some alternative visions other than what they're talking about, rather being, because I think really Obama's ideas, other than the health care bill he got published, he was largely intellectually irrelevant by 2012. And so this was talked amongst, back then I'm a junior scholar. I'd only had my PhD several years. So a lot of what became 2.0 were from then younger rebellious scholars, some new people that didn't have their doctorate yet, some of the activists at the time who were basically kind of disaffected from the whole Hopi dreamy thing, especially following the murder. And I remember one of my students at the college I was teaching at the time said, Dr. Anderson, a Black president, and we still out here getting killed by the police. And so it was that kind of convergence of all of those things that lead to the modern Afrofuturist movement. Because when we revisited it over a decade ago, the people that had coined it back in the 90s had walked away from it because, they had some discussions online or whatever, but it was John Jennings and we made a trip to Paris to try out these new ideas where I had written out the concepts for Afrofuturism 2.0, which was a phrase I coined in conversation with Alondra Nelson at the Alien Bodies Conference in 2013 that was organized by Moya Bailey, who's now a professor at Northwestern. It's called Alien Bodies. And that's when I said, no, Afrofuturism now is not the same as it was in '90. We're talking about social media and a host of other factors. The growing disengagement, or what I always call it, the big sort, where people now largely sort themselves into their own communities of interests, which now we kind of see showing up in our politics. People want to live in this type of community, very intentional about it. So I said, no, Afrofuturism now is a result of this sorting that people are engaging in, social media, uh, issues or problems with globalization, and some other things that I talked about in that book. And for that trip, we go there and we present what John would call Black Kirby, his concept about Black visual art, and my concept about 2.0 Afrofuturism in Paris at the Sorbonne. People went for it. And so I remember having a conversation with John at the time. I said, this thing has legs, and I think when we get back, we need to start having some meetings about it. So we have, you have the Astro Blackness meetings out at Loyola, the Planet Deep South meetings, and there were some other ones where, imagine this, you had in one room at Loyola Marymount, I think that's 2013 or 14, whatever. And you had Nalo Hopkins, Stephen Barnes, Tananarive Due, John Jennings. I forget what that movie star's name that was in from the. If I say his name, you all know. He was there. We had Nadia Corafor, Nalo, Stephen Barnes. And so there are like 50 or 60 of us in the room, and half of us are like established writers, emerging young scholars, or whatever. And we talked about these ideas. And then, in the context of this happening, then Ferguson happens. Okay. I remember teaching at St. Louis at the time. Mike Brown, uncle, was in my class at Harris Stowe State University at the time. And I remember how some of my students got involved with it. I helped facilitate their involvement. And I saw the politics then that people complain about now, the disaffected Black urban youth, and how they're different from Black middle class suburbanite types. Because that's essentially who the Black Lives Matter people were. When Ferguson broke out, Ferguson was started by poor or working class Black folks in response to it, because they had a chant that they did, hands up, don't shoot. But the Black Lives Matter crowd came in with hashtags and social media and coined the phrase Black Lives Matter and so forth. The rest is history. And so when the movement began crumbling, I wasn't surprised, because there was some obvious class stratification inside the movement, that where people who were non-college educated felt disaffected because they didn't know the language. They didn't know what intersectionality was. They thought they were fighting the police. And then you had those people who were college educated, had funds from other people raising money, whatever. So these poor and working class people felt like these people took their voice from them. And that's kind of how it proliferated across the country. And so now, 10 years later, we have this obvious schism inside the Black community that all of a sudden they're worried about, can they be galvanized to vote? But this has been building now for over a decade, and it's not, so I don't know why people are acting shocked about why the intensity for the Democratic Party is not there. The
There's money
Democratic
in
Party
acting
set
shocked.
up intentionally to it not becoming a Black version of the Tea Party. This was done. The Republicans didn't do anything to stop Black Lives Matter. There's mostly the Democratic Party across the country with Black elected officials. Even in Missouri, it was our union which wanted to have a Black community union progressive meeting there was prevented getting the funds, getting it by the black leader of the union at the state level, would not let the national people send money to have the meeting. So the Republic, it was really the
Yeah.
Democratic Party
I think
that
that that's a
stopped
good point you
that a
make
lot
because
of this stuff from
everyone's
happening.
saying that
Huh?
they see. I think the good point you make right there too about and again about thinking about Afrofuturism outside of just really storytelling or the stories that we are telling. People imagine just having Black people fill these positions, these roles, and
Yeah.
not or ethnic people or POC people, and these are supposed to make the change. When we come to find out, despite the identity that these people hold, the allegiance is still to the state. We have, like you said, all these black mayors, Atlanta,
Of course.
Oakland, DC,
Of course.
Chicago, and they're literally kicking, put homeless people in jails, sweeping
Yeah.
tents. And these are mostly predominantly black people and brown people.
Yeah.
There are
It's
these people that
so
they say that, they went to vote, you vote for
so
me because I'm this person
so
like you, and they turn around and kick you out your
so
tent.
so you know so the young black people that are part of the Afrofuturist movement here, I just come out like Malcolm X. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. Could care less about either party. One party's the wolf, the other's the fox. Now, of course, we're not voting for Trump, and yeah, we're gonna vote for Kamala. But I'm like, and I'm encouraging our network. We're gonna have a Zoom to motivate black men to vote. But we're just looking at stuff critically now. Like, look, no, look, we're not friends. This is business, and we're not listening to the old. I think when I talk to younger black men now, I know they're not going to carry the political water for people anymore. They're going to be like every other special interest group. What is in this for me? And so I have to explain it to them like, hey, man, if you don't participate, this can impact your grandmother. This can impact your aunt. This can impact your shorty not having early childhood
To the
education.
people that you belong to, yeah, your
Yeah, people who
community.
you belong to. But people who think they can come criticize them saying, oh, you're being sexist, man, they are going to turn a deaf ear to that. They don't care. They're like, look, I want something out of
It's
this
hard to
too.
that
What's that?
bridge. It's hard to have this bridge too, because it's not just it's a bunch of factors in play. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And it's like sometimes it don't take one conversation to
yeah.
mess it up. Well, you could be, and it really takes like 20 to get it to work. I think that's the hard part, really about. I think like moving maybe just beyond just like the surface
Well,
level. Like, what does
you're
it
out in
really mean
Cali.
to?
You're out in California. It's like Maxine Waters said.
Well, I'm in the hippie place now. Yes, I know. I
Maxine
wasn't
Waters
always
said,
out here.
we can't make Obama do nothing because you all love him too much.
Yeah.
And then she said that. Well, like when he came here in Pittsburgh last week, he said, well, I don't see the energy. He made it about him. I'm like, dude, you got the bag for your family. So what? You know, he resorts to biography to try
Yeah.
and like try to shame black men. And that's why these guys that's 35 on down are like giving him the middle finger. Like,
I
dude,
mean, yeah.
you like Uncle Barack now.
And he
This is
also
not
made, I
oh
think he
08.
made a series
And
of
so the
career moves
contemporary
making that. Yeah.
Afrofuturist movement part of domestically
Hmm.
was out of the frustration in the American domestic political man. They didn't see anybody. We put it this way, the other thing, and this is where it hits home. It's kind of like if you because I taught in public schools for a while. They have resources for people who are special needs or disabled. They have resources for the talented and gifted. There are literally no resources for the C student who's bored in school, who does just enough to get by, but likes reading comic books, playing anime, and who's generally apathetic towards the public school system. This is why a single mother came to our event that we had in Toronto. She said, I love you guys' work because it makes my kid stay interested in school. So, and it's like Stacey Robinson, one of our primary artists, talks about. He said, look, two things I learned from working with Stacey and Cherie Renee Thomas. Cherie Renee Thomas was influential and say, hey, let's ground our stuff in the community because these higher ed places aren't our community friends. So we try to have in community centers or galleries or lodge spaces that they'll feel more comfortable in. And Stacey talks about, as an art movement. I remember when we did our first big show in New York, our art is geared toward the everyday folks. They don't have $1,000 or $2,000 or $800 to buy a big piece of art to hang on the wall, but they got $30. And the woman that's getting off the train, the subway, the bus from work, they like nice things hanging on their wall too. And that's our crowd. We are not there for if the bougie crowd wants to kick in and do something, that's fine. But we're basically, because a lot of us, we still got ties to people that are in these working class communities or whatever, and we're still welcome there when we go. And so, and a lot of these
And
people,
that's where the next folks start coming from too. You know what I mean?
what's that?
Like I said, that's where the next folks start coming from. Yeah, you have a few nepo babies, yeah, but like
Yeah,
usually the next great artist is it's coming out of the struggle.
yeah,
Is usually pushing it forward because they don't have access. They have to. Someone told me, they said they writer friends, they create like they're going to die tomorrow because
yeah,
when you have that urge, that need on you, like that, you go to the place you need to go to produce the work to push
yeah,
yourself to get that far. And it's like I feel like yeah, with my 20s, I didn't necessarily have that knife under me to like really make me go hard. Now that I feel like I've gotten a little bit as I got older, and not necessarily that it has to be like I have a terminal illness or something that's like hanging on there, but it's like you said, we live in a world where someone can call the police on us at any time, at
yeah.
any moment.
And
And so, what
like
does
for
that mean for
instance,
you as a person?
the other thing, I'm old enough to remember as a little kid, and I studied on TV. I watched the Motown story because when I was in college, I used to be a assistant guy, being a promoter for hip hop back during what they call the golden age of hip hop, late '80s, early '90s. I was unaware of, we didn't call it that. We just out there having a good time, throwing concerts, getting people like Poor Righteous Teachers, Too Short, for our shows. And part of BSAM, the movement, is it's become a place where young artists can work on their craft in our intimate settings, and then working with us a couple years, they're ready for a major setting. That's kind of how Motown was. That's what Berry Gordy did. They worked on their craft up in their studios in Detroit on their moves, their art, and their craft. And then by the time they got off of that, they were like flawless, by working on. There are, with the cutbacks in art and music or whatever, there's no place for young artists to even have people see their work, have people engage it, have it travel. And so yeah, that's been about a lot of our stuff, like Tim Fielder's book Infinitum. Tim's book was well received as it's probably the first graphic Afrofuturist novel in this century, original one. But he workshopped that at our events. He workshopped the idea with us, refined it. Now Tim is really, he's doing his thing. Uh, the brother, when we opened up with the show Unveiling Visions, our first major show that John and I co-curated, Manziel Bowman. John found Manziel on Instagram, and Manziel went from this artist who was like, man, kind of working to really get by. But when his art was on the side of that building in Harlem, and people in New York saw it every day, shoot, some of Manziel's art started popping up in movies. It popped up in the that Black Exploitation remake of I can't think of the name of it, hanging on the wall there in the movie. So Jessie U Jazzy, who was an artist we work with out of LA, man, now she's doing stuff for the Lakers. So um, as I'd said in conversation with somebody talking to me recently, I don't walk around think of myself as a leader or whatever, but I guess I'm kind of a spokesperson. But you know what? My own people made me who I am. I was not appointed by anybody. So that gives me a free voice to say what I need to say, how I need to say it, when I want to
LOL.
say it. And I don't, you know what I'm trying to say,
It's
Christian?
well, yeah, it's a little of your personality too,
Say
Dr.
what?
Anderson. I said it's some of your personality too.
Yeah.
I think it's who you are.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I didn't do this, after, teaching in Africa or some or whatever. And that's how this
Hmm.
network and modern movement was built. And so that's why you never see me engage online when people go, well, what is this, that, and the other? And that's why before we got on, I said, look, a lot of these people's, when they try to define Afrofuturism, that's just an opinion with footnotes. That's all it is. Our definition is tied to the theory, the scholarship, and the actual practice and the proof of building this network internationally and the people that are part of it, which is
Yeah,
people who read know what time it is. I don't worry
and
about
that
people that don't read books.
and that's some of the things like with like some the person you met, like Cherie. Cherie was like one of the first people to put a Black Speculative anthology together with
Yes,
the Dark Matter series, you know, which included, you know, Samuel Delaney's Science Fiction and
yeah,
Racism, which included Okafor before she
yes.
had the African Jujuism and stuff now. Like all
Uh-huh.
so like this is I'm relating this a little bit more to maybe people who will be familiar with some of the more with Fiyah since it's more like speculative literature. Like this is other people who are a part of the Black Speculative Arts Movement, like just giving context why into what Dr. Anderson is saying is like this intentionality to build these relationships. And so also like, you know, it's not to do this just because it's like we want to be the first people to do this or this is a cool thing to do, but this is like our intentionality of and bringing into
Yeah.
play what we feel like is the truth and like what we work hard for. Yeah, I'm gonna work with Cherie this in January in Mexico, so I'm super excited about it. She's obviously everyone knows she's brilliant, but it's just
Yeah.
like she's been in the game for so long, you know, like because she put those anthologies together. I used to sell those at bookstores. Like
Yeah.
those are my like best sellers because people was wanting something right before that Black Panther era. They were wanting it, but it was only N.K. Jemisin or Victor
Yeah.
Laval. You know, I mean, obviously it's brilliant. It's millions of people, but it only felt like it was only those handful of popular people at the moment. And so it was just very, I was doing my research, you know, it was just like, here she was, like bringing all of these people that you may have never heard of and the people that you do know of, you
All in
know.
one that
People
anthology.
wasn't
Yeah.
even thinking about the comment really like that. I feel like with Du Bois,
That's right.
into I feel like she did that, you know. And I think that I really do feel like that Samuel Delaney's essay, his 1999 Science Fiction and Racism, is like
Yes.
still relevant today. He
It
made like a
is.
really good point, and it's just like some people don't even know that, you know. It's like it's so interesting,
Man.
you know. All of these people, I even think about even Butler if she was around today, how just like you know when you die, you know about it until you die, and it feels like now she could just take on this like I don't know when she went like when it went bestseller, and it was like yeah I want more people to read her text, but what does it mean that it went bestseller after she already passed away? You know, I think about that a little bit too. It's like how are we living through you know the dead, you know what we
Yeah.
want for the dead. And you know, and what like you was talking about, what is going to mean for AI? People, our great legends are selling their rights over to companies to be
Oh yeah.
reproduced.
Look.
Like
Talking about
Tina
selling the
Turner
rights.
she sold is
If
millions. She
you
sold it for
if you
millions.
go if you Google BSAM and Cannes when we participated in the Cannes Film Festival, and the Black Speculative Art had an event there. I had a gentleman walk up to me and offer me $500,000 to sell the rights to BSAM or whatever. I said no. And because one, I knew that if it was worth that much, it was probably worth a lot more. And then I'm like this, and you could quote me. I guess I'm going to end up being kind of like the August Wilson of Afrofuturism. My intellectual work, and I'm working on it with people now. I guess you're here first. I'm making sure it's left in Black hands when I'm done, because so many of our gifted and creative, they die messy. And so I have a person that's working out, where our stuff will be archived and all that. And August Wilson, he talked about he had very specific instructions with his estate. I'm not leaving it with my family. Hell, they don't even read what I read. I love them or whatever, but they're not Afrofuturists. So it's going to be people who know what to do
They'll
with the archive. So
understand.
I'm not going to have
No,
family bickering over my stuff. I'm like, look, y'all got the insurance and whatever and all this, but my ideas are going to be with some people that
mm,
understand what the hell I was talking about.
my family still used to be like, "Why you just not gonna work for Tyler Perry?" I was like,
Yeah,
"Please,
so.
please," you know. It's like
And so that's one of the things, yeah, and I learned a lot from and I told Cherie the other day, I was like, look, Cherie, if they wanted to reach these people that's Black people or whatever, they ought to really let you be their spokesperson or whatever, because this is kind of what this Black speculative ideas see, and here's philosophically what's happening at this moment, why the movement and the ideas are important and why people are looking at it. Harold Cruz wrote a book back in the 1960s called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And his core thesis in the book, one of them was that with the passage of the 1964 and 65 Civil Rights Act, Black liberalism became the dominant philosophy in the Black community ahead of the nationalists, because for roughly about 200 years, those have been the clashing ideologies. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 effectively ended Black liberalism as a dominant philosophy in the Black community. Oh, they use words like progressive and all that kind of stuff now. If you just go read even some of the progressive, you write the article, they say, oh, progressivism is dead, blah, blah, blah. You know, like, and so that's where, remember when, if you go back and you can look it up, man, they were saying that, you know, Harris is trying to ride to victory on the concept of Black joy, you know, to galvanize people. Now, the reactionary kind of borderline and sometimes ethno-fascist people of the right, of course, they have no ideas. They are responding to the metaphysics of horror. Okay, that's when you hear the term replacement theory and all this stuff. They're operating on a metaphysics of horror. But the people who claim to be liberal, progressive, whatever, they're out of ideas. Now, some of them know they got ideas, but they don't understand how to make them work because they can't get around certain material realities, like the reality of being $36 trillion in debt, the reality of demographic decline, the reality, all these several things converging at the same time where their ideas don't hold up to the actual test when you look at what they're talking about. That's why at least the British came out and said, well, we're going to engage in something called progressive realism. Okay, in terms of maybe, hey, we're generally for progressive stuff, but only if it's means tested based upon material realities that are crashing in on the world right now. But Americans, because they're undereducated, because 60% of them operate off of a 6th grade level of education, Americans can't handle somebody coming in, oh yeah, by the way, these 5 or 6 things over the next 10 years can like ruin your life. You know, you don't win elections that way. So you win by lying or withholding parts of the truth with the American electorate until they get hit with it. And as you know, in Afrofuturism, we deal with look, these are trends we're seeing. There are possibilities out here. And that's why a lot of countries now are looking at what this intersection between think tanks and speculative writers are dealing with, trying to come up with alternative ways of, like, for instance, there's a book called Womb City out now by a Botswanan woman. And Womb City is talking about in the near future where African women, to earn a living, are basically renting out their wombs for people to have babies so they can keep the human population going or whatever.
Yep.
And how is that different from slavery of a couple hundred years ago? You know? So it's slavery by another name, where how do you, because all the Western countries now are concerned about demographic decline trends. I think Germany, they said, is projected to be down to about 5 million German people by the end of this century. People where both your parents are German. Italy's even worse. You know, so that's why they're building this kind of artificial wall to keep people out, because they don't want to be demographically overrun. And so the kind of speculative fiction that's emerging now, like Womb City, is looking at this thing of because then if you're going through a demographic decline, you can't have capitalism because capitalism requires consumers.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. The world as we understand it is coming to an end. It's unraveling. And nobody has a message in the mainstream political arena to help us understand what that means for our lives over the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the world is going through a realignment over the next 10 years where people that used to be allies, now all of a sudden they're kind of going to become political fence sitters or what they call swing voters because of this uncertainty that's going to take place between 2025 and 2035. And some writers have kind of already written what that looks like in science fiction or speculative writing. And so now you got people with think tanks that deal with forecasting, engaging with, because that's why we did an activity with the think tank N Square during
Mm-hmm.
COVID with some of our visual artists and writers. Like, what happens when you take the Black speculative imagination and it intersects with the tools of a think tank in terms of looking at the future? And that's how we came up with our exercise that we did at the UN Future Summit,
Right.
Quantum
Yep.
Seeds of
I remember doing
Tomorrow,
that. Mm-hmm.
because that's where we're at now. Trying people
And that's
are,
like really
yeah,
quickly. I think what's just in case, like what I think has been brought up of what you're saying, even about like the misinformation, reading comprehension, that I
yeah,
feel like also that really shows up a little bit, not a little bit, but that shows up prominently in Afrofuturism. Is like
yeah,
using symbols as as like
of
metaphysics,
course.
but also in terms of like communication tools. I remember when working with Shatana a lot, her big thing was how can we talk about these metaphysics in ways where kids can talk about them as well, and that involved like symbols and like actually like blocks
Okay.
and like doing
And I'll make it
exercises
simple
to
for
act
you.
out that speculative acting too,
Here, here's
not just like reading and watching
here's the
only.
simple
But
part.
yeah.
Think about it.
Hmm.
When I went to the Byzantine Museum in Athens, and in there they have art from several hundred years ago that showed what Jesus and the disciples looked like. In there, they have a picture of Mary, an obviously brown looking woman about your complexion, holding a baby, and the baby's even darker than she is, and the baby has an afro. So I guess the Holy Spirit must have been somebody like on the order of a Wesley Snipes person. And the disciples are clearly men of color at the time. And then they had, after this period where these art was created. So when I heard this rabbi trying to criticize, well, like the stuff that happened with the Haitian people in Ohio, well, they're not really Western. I'm like, Christianity was not founded as a Western faith tradition. It comes out of Northeast Africa and the Near East or whatever. It's not European. And the Byzantine Museum reflects that. So to convert Europeans to the faith, they had what was called an iconography movement. Basically, give them Jesus and God as themselves to convert them. Because guess what? We know they didn't. There was no public education or anything like that in Europe. They couldn't read until the last couple hundred years, so they had to convert them through what? Images and art. Michelangelo, all them stuff. So they had what was called an iconography movement. Now, fast forward to now with AI, the iconography is going to be constructed deceptively by AI in the form of deep fakes to educate or miseducate people. At the UN Summit of the Future, they are going to be using deep fake to attack Black women. A lot of these platforms are going to be coming out of Russia and Pakistan to specifically to using this iconography via AI to confuse Black populations, since you'll not be able to discern from what's real. Now, mind you, I said the population operated on a sixth grade level of reading, so it's not hard to figure out what might happen if you use sophisticated AI and deep fakes, and it's hit to certain populations to confuse them about certain types of things that may or may not be in their interest. So there'll be a new 21st century kind of iconography movement from some bad actors targeting certain communities. And that's coming within the next 18 months.
Yeah, and it's built off of what already has been happening.
Yeah,
they're already been taking advantage of Black people in terms of like housing, in terms of like credit, in terms of debt. You
yeah,
know, this is just a continuation of like the latest stages of capitalism. Like you said, they're running out of ideas, and so now the idea has to it have to just pile up on top of each other.
yeah,
The space is out, so now it's like the digital space. And it's very interesting because what you were saying, like how some of this was coming together during that, which could be like the, I guess the second boom, when Delaney and Butler and that, I forgot that guy. He coined the term. I can't think of his name right now. But when he coined the term, it entered in a phase of popularity. And the internet was booming, like you said, from the chat rooms to the blogs now to we have social media. A huge part of it, and a part of the Pan African movement was that this digital divide would be closed. Just once the electricity, once the internet had gotten to these areas, this class level, the social, the dollar would, be able to transfer further and be able to, education and things like that, opportunity would be able to increase. But it seems like, and I maybe, like I said, I'm not as, I wasn't alive as long, so I don't know before it came in, after, but it feels like it hasn't necessarily closed. I feel like the gap has only gotten, like you had mentioned earlier, like more fragmented. It feels like you were saying, because of we're black and we communicate kind of differently because of geopolitical places we are. Sometimes we're saying similar things or the same things, but differently, and that's causing like friction and fragmentation around it.
Oh, of course.
And yeah, I just was wondering, like, what do you think? I know you like one of the responses is DSAM and like having places in each area, but like,
Uh,
what do you think
well,
about that sort of Afrofuturism? Like, having
uh,
better internet didn't necessarily didn't necessarily close
I'm
the gap.
thinking there. I know there's a company called Latimer, a black-owned company that's going to be dealing with AI around education and so forth. Um, we are going to have some AI tools to augment ourselves with to determine what is real and what is not real. Um, and the world, or at least in this country, is resegregating itself along ideological, cultural lines. In Jackson, Mississippi, all across the South, uh, white communities are trying to separate themselves from the urban core. Okay, all the way from Louisiana through Georgia. I think Buckhead wanted to separate from Atlanta. In Jackson, they're trying to do the same thing with in Jackson, have their own judiciary system that's separate from the local judiciary. They're already doing it in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Um, and this is why the black rebels have no solution. They keep forgetting that civil rights and a lot of the stuff they liked, and I'm not a conservative by any means, but a lot of what the black liberals wanted, that was came into being when America was the unchallenged hegemonic power of the world. And they could spread the largesse around to maintain social order. And part of that deal to de-radicalize the black population was to, under the Nixon administration, inaugurate what they would call affirmative action. They keep forgetting it was Republicans brought in affirmative action, to take the fangs out of that Black Panther Party movement and all that kind of stuff. And people keep forgetting that's what affirmative action was. It was kind of part of a carrot and a stick method. So what I think, and if there is a lot, I think the black communities are getting very much more insular. Uh, and I think you're going to have people develop AI that are particularly tied to their interest, and that's going to assist them in making certain type of decisions. Um, uh, so I think the next 10 years, and it's not going to be on just one day. A lot of the ideas, when you think about it, that were popular in the 20th century, whether it was Marxism, feminism, uh, nationalism, certain types of it, all of that stuff is going away as an organizing principle for how to move forward. Uh, there'll be different variations of those coming forward. Like you might see some combination of like community nationalism with AI being generated. I think. Um, I know the Palmer, I forget the contributor to the New York Times that wrote the article a couple years ago that she declared feminism was dead. I don't know if the black women that are practicing feminism agreed with her, but she came out and said it was dead, not me. And so people know that we're going into something new over the next several years, and that the ideas that got them to this point are going away. It was acknowledged there at the UN because we're thinking about it, the World Bank, the United Nations, all that stuff that was created since World War II, all of those institutions are called into question. People, regardless of their background, don't believe in their institutions anymore. A belief in the Supreme Court is at an all-time low. So when people don't believe in institutions, people are going to think of, okay, what are we going to do? Or those, yeah, I mean, shoot, I don't have to go and elaborate on January 6th. I think no matter who wins next month, the other side is not going to accept the outcome. And so I wouldn't surprise if you hear people in California, if Trump was calling for a secessionist movement, the West Coast. Because I'm going to tell you, I was in the Midwest and the South, man. Here on the East Coast or West Coast, they're talking about this, how they talk about the middle part of the country or whatever. Up in New York, I just heard people talking, look, they're just tired of these welfare states. Like that state is so poor, they shouldn't even be allowed to have 2 senators. I think the New Yorkers call them taker states, in terms of, why should we subsidize those people? We're paying all these taxes and helping those ignorant people and so and so, and they're in a MAGA state. So, yeah, man, this has become visceral the last few years. How people feel about other Americans in this country. I've never seen the anti-immigration sentiment be this high before. And that is something that in the urban core is a real issue. These people that are working class or poor, now I think the Biden administration, that kind of shocked everybody when they came out and said 10 million people have come in the country the last 4 years. That shocked people. That's what the urban poor and working class is angry about, because they have to compete for the same services and public education. And the suburban liberal types whose kids don't go to any of those schools or need any of those services, they just thought, hey, let me just support DEI and all things will be added unto you. And so the working class and poor in this country are pissed about the shock of these changes are coming swiftly and the uncertainty of what does it mean, how will artificial intelligence impact my job. So that and in this vacuum of ideas, that creates the opportunity for fascistic thinking to enter our political sphere. And it has captured the imagination of almost half the country, and it's just going to be a few 100,000 people are getting ready to determine what's going to happen to us over the next decade here, out of 333 million people, which is terrifying to some people. I couldn't hear what you said. Can you
My
hear
bad.
me?
The thing,
Oh, you're back.
no,
Okay.
the bar was over the mute button, and so
Okay.
I would try to raise my thing up, and it would go into a small box.
Okay.
Anyways, technology. Okay, yeah, I was a couple things that stood out to me, Dr. Anderson, that I think we can sort of transition to. One of the things I was thinking about, you had mentioned AI, and so I was thinking about just like, since you feel like it's here, I know right now, especially in the speculative writing community and also in the art community, huge thing about it scrapping and taking things and repurposing things and also taking from the off of like how it builds its model and how it builds its like intelligence. What are your thoughts about that? Because it's like it seems like in a way that it's still within like this technology advancement that it's still leaning on like a capitalist system, and that still seems
Uh,
like it's gonna have like racial implications
they
per se.
they don't know how capitalism is going to work after the year 2060. Um, and each country is dealing with it based upon what their demographics look like. For example, with our network in Germany, see the average skilled German that creates creative stuff in Germany over there, their average age, they're in their 50s now. They don't have enough young people. Like, for instance, we had a millennial generation here. You know, millennials being the children of the boomers, large generation. Most of the world, the rest of they never even had a millennial generation. You know, they had smaller generation coming, so they don't have enough people to fill what's leaving their workforce in the next decade. Okay. Most of your talented engineers, tech people, all the people that run their society from Germany to Russia or whatever, they're all in their 50s. So these countries are trying to figure out how do we adapt in the next 10 years just to maintain what we have now. Uh, Germany recently cut a deal with Kenya to allow around 250,000, I guess, guest workers to come there. And I think they're trying to deal with Ghana, Nigeria. I know America just uh, agreed to allow 250,000 people from India to come to immigrate, skilled workers. But at the same time, they're talking about trying to get rid of 10 million people that are here that are in an undocumented status. And so I don't think they'll be able to make that happen in one Donald Trump term. But I know in Arizona, I know a part of our network was telling me that there are already mothers in Arizona who, in the eventuality of a Trump victory, are trying to find people that will take care of their kids after they're put out of the country. And this has precedent. Back in the 1930s, they put out millions of Hispanics were deported from the country during the Great Depression. Some that were even American citizens. We already know that they put Japanese American people in internment camps during World War II. So, you know, we try to act like we're not capable of doing, this country's not capable of doing certain things, and it is. If it feels, you know, when it gets into a certain mindset and it grips the country, and the former 45th president is a catalyst for that sentiment. And it's one of the reasons I've criticized and got young people to ignore the Green Party. I was like, that's merely a protest vote. The guy who's the vice presidential candidate sounds like he's trying to run to be the mayor of Gaza instead of the vice president of the United States. They have one issue that they're running on. Pretty much Judith Stein, same issue. And they have no larger, serious, substantive platform, and they're not going to get more than 1% of the vote. But in a couple of states, it might throw it up enough to help Trump win electorally, you know. And they came out, they just want enough votes so they can get some more federal money to keep them as a viable political entity in the country. They know they're not even going to get barely 1 or 2%, you know. So there's a lot of anxiety around a lot of what these artists are trying to think about what will happen. There are major projects now in the literary field or in the corporate or in the field that are being held up. Projects tied to Black creatives that are not going to go into production because they're waiting to see the outcome of the election first, you know. And this is one of the reasons we created BSAM. You know, I remember a lot of artists in the last decade, they were all happy with all the DEI initiatives, getting opportunities they wouldn't have before. And now all that stuff, the last 18 months, a lot of it's dried up. But BSAM, we were never based upon diversity, equity, inclusion. We were based it on like, look, this is our stuff and we're gonna put it out here anyway. And you know, we are a self-contained entity, and we weren't gonna make the same mistakes that the Black Arts Movement did in the 70s. So we never believed that the DEI stuff was gonna stay anyway, you know. And now that they're basically getting rid of it across the country. Yeah, a lot of the creative artistic types got the blues now, but our network was never based upon, I guess some of the younger people might have called it respectability politics. No, it was based on we do what we like and we find identifying the people who like our stuff and we make it, and keep it moving. So so yeah, right now I'd say it's kind of up in the air at the moment. Where
Hmm.
a lot of the art, they don't. Everyone's like watching everybody else.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
what I'm getting the sense of it. I mean, like it's getting real polarizing, and so I think it's going to be interesting to see um the ways in which it develops, like you said, over the next like 5 to 10 years,
yeah,
and how people are utilizing it, like you said, like in terms of like making up for maybe skills that they don't have or can't like develop in a way that other people, you dedicate your life to something, you focus on it. And then what that means also again now, like to be an artist, which is different from what it had meant to be at a different time as well. And so, you mentioned a lot also too about this sort of like geopolitical location, with these things happening in different areas where Black people also live throughout the diaspora. And so, thinking about that in terms of like the future, like you said, with like the possible like standard use of AI or not, or in like these different places like not necessarily connecting over the internet. And so like what do you think is like, I know you mentioned a little bit before, like the like a 2.5 or a 3.0, or like what's coming next in terms of like this
oh,
evolution
okay.
where we are like
Here,
from now,
here,
because we've kind of
here's what
like
I'm
building up
hopeful
on that.
about. I
Hmm.
really like what some of the young people in Africa are doing. The fact that the young people rose up on William Ruto in Kenya. I remember back when they were having the police protest in Lagos, Nigeria. I had to send people that were friendly to our network. We used cryptocurrency so that they could keep a roof over their head during the protest when they had to kind of like stay in place and not leave their homes for a week or so. Uh, I'm excited about the young people, Gen Z of Africa, that big population bulge, because they are tired of these old people across the continent that are corrupt and still trying to keep themselves in charge. So I'm like, that's the part that gives me staying hopeful about the capacity of people of African descent showing some agency for some meaningful political change. Africa is the big enchilada right now. It has most of the world's remaining arable land, resources that are needed for tech, and Africa is still kind of underpopulated. But everybody is looking at it now to see what they can get out the deal. And if there's an Afrofuturism 3.0, it's going to largely be impacted by two dominant philosophical trends that I see emerging. What I would call the Afro-Atlantic part of the global African people and the Afro-Asiatic perspective. And what I mean by Afro-Atlantic, if you look at the West, they are trying to cut deals with all of the countries that are Black that used to be considered part of the British Commonwealth, the English speaking parts of Africa, the Caribbean, or the Black world. And they're also doing that with the Indians, also like, you had Sunak as the prime minister in UK, and now they're trying to take this Black woman here and make her president here. So they're trying to set it up. The global elites, or when you think about global elite management, they want people of African and Asian descent to help maintain the status quo. Now, on the other side of that, what I'm calling the Afro-Asiatic take is
Oh, Dr. Anderson, you froze up on us. Oh, he was doing so good. Well, let's see if he comes back. This isn't the first time this happened.
Oh, he was just right in the middle of such a great point.
I know. I think he's coming back. Let's see.
Okay.
Dardan, you're
Here we
back.
go. Here we
I
go.
thought
I'm
we was
back.
gonna make it. I thought we was gonna make it
All
through.
right. Yeah, I thought we were gonna make it, but I guess we didn't before stuff happened. As I was
Do you
saying,
remember your point? Oh, okay, cool.
yeah, the point. Afro-Asia is lining up with China and Russia and Iran. Okay, because this month on the 20th, pay attention to a major meeting that I think is taking place in Russia, where a lot of these countries that are also operate under the term BRIC are coming together to put together an alternative financial system to engage in international trade without using the dollar. Okay. And if that happens, that's going to set off a chain reaction. Now, South Africa is probably, you could consider, and along with the countries that are in the Sahel region of Africa right now, are kind of at the forefront of this resistance to Western domination around technology and currency. So you have the Afro-Atlantic that they want to remain subordinate to the Western elite. And I could say, you could kind of say the Afro-Asia bloc that is more sympathetic to Russia and China and the rest of Asia. And so those two perspectives are going to show up in our literature. It's going to show up in geopolitics. And as I've said before, Afrofuturism 3.0 will occur when there is an African nation state that can develop its own satellite and communication networks. And I know Natrice Gaskins talked about in 2.0, she's talking about the semantic web, but I'm talking about um, economic and technological or sovereignty. Okay, I'm dealing with sovereignty issues. 3.0 can happen when there's an African nation state that has actually real sovereignty in the world system.
That's a
You know,
contention
right
point.
now there.
That's a real
What's
contention
that?
point right there. I said that's a real contention point right there.
Yeah.
Sovereignty.
See, a lot of us
Yeah.
keep thinking that, people ARPANET, what we call the internet, that was a military invention of the late 60s. But if you don't control your resources, your land that you're living on and all this stuff, you don't have sovereignty. Now we have technological skills. So that's what I'm saying. Now, for the 3.0 phrase to happen, there's going to be some stuff happening over the next 10 years around geopolitics and supply chain and currency. And out of that, and then along with AI and the emerging biotech revolution, at the end of that 10-year dust up, there's going to be a realignment domestically and internationally. And we kind of see in some of the early contours of what that looks like, you know. So I'm just, I'm gonna be closely watching what happens overseas on October 20th with these countries around the financial question, and if they agree, because I think the bank that's supposed to be kind of facilitating and underwriting is the Shanghai Banking Corporation, because the Chinese are kind of like the money bags piece of this at this point, and the Americans are working day and night to keep from South Africa from fully moving over into that column, which is why they supported the Democratic Alliance in terms of undermining the ANC as a governing force in South Africa. So, yeah, man, the next 10 years, I mean, I'll be closer to retirement and you'll be, I don't know how old you'll be in 10 years. You maintain your health, you're going to see a totally different realignment from the one you were born into in the next 7 to 10 years.
I think this could be exciting because it's like the thing is, I feel like some of the point of futurism is not just to predict, but to get there. And so, what does it? I think one of the points that Afrofuturism sort of contends with, or at least I think supposed to, when you're really doing it, is that futurism somehow ends up as fascism. Well, not somehow. We know how,
Oh,
but
yeah.
how do we stop futurism? What makes the Afro part of
Um,
that? And I think that's what's happening. With
well,
like what you're
that's
talking about.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know there's a recent article a sister from South Africa wrote. I can email and share with you where she talks about this critical Black futures perspective. But Harold Cruz said this back in the '60s, and I take heart in that. You know, when he talked about this crisis, he said the way out of it was going to be discerned by the creative intellectual people. It wasn't going to be determined by some Democrat or Republican politician or whatever. It's going to be somebody through innovation and creativity that gets enough buy-in from a certain percentage of the community that's going to, like I can remember when Bitcoin broke loose. So think of it like that. Over the next 7 to 10 years, they're using stuff to try and plug the dikes, but the dike is going to burst because of all these converging forces. $36 trillion debt, climate change, and a whole bunch of other issues are going to shatter the status quo. And that's why the futurists are reading our stuff. The old school futurists are they're trying to look at it now. They're talking about diversity and futurism, but no, all of our cultural assumptions, where we might borrow some of their tools and come to some completely different conclusions. Because future studies was set up following World War II basically as world management for white folks. And that's at the heart of future studies. And now, however, now that the data is being processed, the demographics or whatever, they've had to reevaluate their entire process. Pretty much what the traditional futurist think tanks are doing now is I think, in my opinion, this is my opinion, they're trying to figure out how to circle the wagons around whatever is left. And because right now I think one of the funds that they all draw money from, and see, I got to peek behind the curtain a little bit. They have a $6 billion fund that these entities apply for resources from. There's not a single autonomous Black think tank in the world at this current time. And, for whatever reason, we got people who are independent scholars that we're doing this stuff, but a think tank that is set up just to think about the future of Black people in the world does not exist, anywhere, even in the ostensibly free Black countries. And so that's why this work is mostly maintained by independent scholars and networks like ourselves that are doing it, that are probably annoying the hell out of them. Exchanging this data across all of these nation states with each other, and then we just put the information out there. And so so some people are going to use you're already seeing some of the future stuff as fascism. That's what replacement theory, and now you hear Donald Trump talking about bad genes and all this
The
other stuff.
demagoguey, yeah. I was just like I was just trying to
That's
put some
kind
of
of
that
like the
together,
new
like you were
eugenics
saying it.
movement. They don't want to see
The race science is coming back. Well, it
the
never
race
left,
science is
but
coming back.
it's really coming back. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's got a new strongness to it. Okay, Dr. Anderson, so just let me take the time. Cool. I got two more questions for you. Then we're gonna open up for Q&A just in case anybody
Okay.
has something they want to ask you. So I'm just gonna ask you both, and then you can just answer them. The first question is, can you tell us what we can expect from you in the future, near or far? I know you've been hinting around some things. And then the last question is, what would you say to yourself in the future when I bring you back for our next interview?
Okay. My project I'm working now is on Afrofuturism and world order. I'm trying to get that published. I've had good reviews on the manuscript. Looks like it's going to be with a prominent university press. Hopefully we'll have the book cover and design out here in the next 60 days for people to see. Hopefully it goes to press in the spring. The reviewers were saying they think this is a unique, one-of-a-kind product that I'm weaving together in an interesting way that they find compelling. So I'm kind of excited about that project, and I'm working on pulling an anthology together for another university press that brings together Africana studies and Afrofuturism from people on the continent and the diaspora that I'm very excited about. And the last thing is doing another art exhibition, my third one, with Carnegie Hall for their upcoming season, looking at Afro Latin music and co-curating it with this young, talented Black Brazilian woman named Zaika dos Santos in the next few months. So got a lot of stuff coming up here that I'm excited about over the next year. And what was the second question again?
Second question is when I bring you back for either the next book or the anthology or both, what would you say to yourself? So I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna cut it and I'm gonna play it to you in the future. So you're gonna send a message to yourself in the future. It's supposed to be a take on, when they say, what would you tell yourself when you growing up or your kid self? I feel like they always do that. So I'm like, what would
Oh
we tell
man.
ourselves next year or the couple years ahead that we might need to hear or we might not realize that at the moment. And so when I
Oh,
see you next time, I'm gonna play it for you, and then we're gonna see how you feel about it.
oh man. Mm. One thing I always tell to be, and I've told my young people is sometimes be willing to walk alone if need be. When the crowd is going one way and you go in the direction that you know is right, if it is ethically sound and supported by the proper information, that the people who are sane will find you. And but you have to be prepared to um, deal with some disappointment because when you get the inner of area of chaos, it's not going to be all sunshine and whatever. And but we've navigated our way through these issues before, so I think we'll be all right. And literacy and staying informed is more crucial than ever uh, in the near future. This is one time where I've never seen so many misinformed people uh, allowed to get a mic or a bullhorn to say something that is completely ridiculous. Um, and that just tells you the country's going through a toothpaste test right now. And what I mean by a toothpaste test, what's in toothpaste, you squeeze it, you find out what's on the inside of it. And you find it out now, a lot of people, when they face under pressure, they're full of bullshit, under pressure. And everybody, we're going to go through our collective toothpaste test over the next 30 days. So I guess that's the statement we'll be revisiting. How did America look after we went through a toothpaste test in the fall of 2024?
I can't wait to be in the future to look back too. I always love that sort of thing. It's like we used to do it when we were kids. You put it in the ground, and then when you got older, they dug it up and you wrote a note to yourself. I always thought that was just interesting, so I try to play on
Yeah.
that. Thanks, Dr. Anderson. I appreciate you for coming here. I'm gonna open it up to if anybody got any questions. And also if you haven't read Afrofuturism 2.0 or Dr. Reagan even mentioned the other journals. Dr. Anderson's also have been curating and editing like these journals, which kind of is like a 2.5. It's kind of like a bridge that folks could check out. Yeah, 2.0 is a little dense. It's a little more academic, but I think it expands upon the ways that you can use futurisms or use Afrofuturisms or even use the imagination to think about the ways in which we are living with each other. The metaphysics doesn't just stop at literature or it doesn't just stop at concepts. These
Mhm.
performances that we are doing are, and the performance that we are doing under the conditions that we live in, it's all, it's continuing with that. And so that's one of the reasons I really wanted to like bring Dr. Anderson in to show these connections to particularly the speculative, with like not just with like Noah Cherie or Cherie being a part of like that larger movement, who's like a prominent figure in our field, but in the sense that our work is continuously contending with these things all the time, because of the way that race is situated as a global norm. And as Dr. Anderson was talking about the contention of this continent, in these nation states within that continent, and how people are, exchanging. It's not people are moving into like a new sort of like micro like capitalism, how to get these, how to get money and how to get labor, how to get free things from places for your people, for the people you care, they care about in their nation states. And I think we're seeing that a lot, like you said, Dr. So people are like, I'm moving on from this, and another group is coming in and taking advantage of people, and some of these people end up being black usually, to either get out of this world order or go against it, or still have to play by the rules to a certain degree. So I think, a lot of things Dr. Anderson touched on is about different ways that Black folks could think, imagine, and also act on those like theories and imaginations to change, alter, or contend with the things that we have to. So all that to say, if anybody got any questions, feel free. I have Dr. Anderson a lot of stuff I talk to him pretty frequently. So yeah, so they always have something interesting to say, and always pushes me to like think beyond what I've already was starting to think about. So yeah. But also no pressure because I know how I can be. But they're not scary, I promise.
Hello,
Yeah, go ahead,
the
Demetria. Just
microphone
take
is off.
yourself off.
So I know they have like, oh, and by the way, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I wanted to ask you, how do you think, because I know they have a Russian and African summit. So I was just wondering, how do you think Russian and African alliance is going to impact Afrofuturism and also the African diaspora as a whole?
Oh man. Okay, let me see how I can say something and not be investigated.
LOL. Don't get it shut down, Dr. Anderson. We just get
I'm
started.
glad that some of the African countries, see in the Sahel, I'm a big fan of the AES, IAS. That's that new triumvirate of countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Russia is helping them get nuclear power. Okay. Russia and the countries that you see, Russia now is doing some tech transfers and helping them to regain their economic sovereignty from France. France is one of the main culprits in terms of why French-speaking Africa is underdeveloped. Without its former African countries, France would be a second-rate country. Because it can, through the CFA, the currency that France set up for its former colonies, where each of those African countries has to deposit some of its wealth in France every year to help underwrite the CFA. So my friend I've gotten for a Machiavellian. I'm like this: if two people that are my enemies are fighting each other, well, good for me. Okay. Now, from an African perspective, it would be good for the war in Ukraine to last another year, because that means that's another year that NATO can't come in and bother the Africans and take their resources. And so by having Europe afraid of Russia at the moment, that means they don't have the time or the resources to send assassins and paratroopers down into Africa to overthrow those governments. That's what they used to do in the 70s, aided sometimes by the Israeli Mossad, which is why the Africans are on the side of the Palestinians and that whole, as I said, that new emerging alternative world order. Because the countries that seem to be friends of Africa right now are Turkey, Russia, China, Iran. Let me see. And the countries that are anti-Black, anti-African are like the United Arab Emirates, NATO. It's gotten, France is so scared now. They're letting the Kenyans, the English-speaking country, try to organize a France-Africa summit, because the Africans want the French out. So they can't even have it in one of the French-speaking African countries. They want France out, and the West, because of the war in Ukraine or whatever, they don't have enough troops to go in and try to suppress Africa anymore. So what's happening there on the European front is to the benefit of the Africans. Now, one part of it that's going to hurt is there's not enough grain coming out of that part of the world, especially in East Africa, for them to have bread to eat. But from what I understand, the Russians are going to try to subsidize some of that. But the whole kit and caboodle, if you go back and read Lathrop Stotter's book, the Rising Tide of Color, they knew 100 years ago. I think if you get in the library or you get it free online, they said 100 years ago the only way the West can maintain its hegemonic power of the world was the ability to control South America and Africa. Those are the twin pillars of Western power, as into perpetuity being used as resources for them to maintain control, because they don't have the population anymore. It's in decline. So they got to eternally have Black people be cheap labor and a source of resource extraction, the same way they extract talent and resources out of our communities here in America to stay in power. And now that the world has kind of figured that out, the other history lesson is this: America has never treated its Black citizens right unless it had a powerful external enemy. And that was what the Cold War was about. With the Soviet Union and the non-aligned movement, they had to grant Black Americans civil rights to maintain their loyalty, along with affirmative action and all these other things. See, people keep forgetting what we got or whatever. Anything we got, we didn't get it because they love us so much. It was all about maintaining internal order in the society back in the 60s and 70s. That's why they had to grant women's rights, because women were cutting up. They had to stop all this marching and social unrest. That's why all those laws around marriage, housing, voting rights, and all that took place between 1964 to 1972. I'm old enough to remember when women couldn't go get credit cards on their own as a kid, or they had to get their husband or another man to help them even get a car. And so they are worried about this whole thing that they built from 1945 to 2008 going away. And that's the way. When I hear Black people saying, "Oh, we need to pray for Israel," I said, "No, you don't." I was like, "Man, that's no. That has nothing to do with you." That's why I had to tell people at church that has nothing to do with us. That whole situation, God bless both of them and God for us all. But I've seen the bad on both sides coming out of there. One side thinks that because of Christianity we should be for a nation, and the other side, because of some other stuff, think we should set ourselves on fire politically to keep them warm and not vote in the election. I was like, no, my people got whooped too much for these votes to sit out and not vote. And so that is, when you talk about Africans, the Africans are sick of the French. They want them out. And basically because they feel like the Russians and Turks and all are treating them better. And that's the real politics they want to keep off the TV. That, and when it comes to Africa, Black Americans, we understand South Africa and the black-white thing, in terms of why are a minority group in telling Black people or bossing them around in South Africa. We don't understand the inter-ethnic conflict in the other geographic zones of Africa, but they're slowly figuring it out, and the young people really got it figured out. And they're tired of this aging leadership. But Africa's trying to figure out how do they employ these tens and tens and tens of millions of people over the next generation with jobs. Because if you don't have enough jobs, there'll be revolution. And there'll just be a lot of social unrest. And within one generation, 1 out of every 3 people in the world is going to look like a person on this call. That's how many Black people are coming, and they're trying to figure out what to do with this population where 1/3 of the world is people of African descent. And that's the only reason the West is looking at them as possible future labor or cheap labor or consumers or whatever. And how do they keep them under their control within the next 10, 20 years? That's all. It has nothing to do with democracy, nothing to do with all this and other stuff. It's all about, we cannot be on top unless we control Africa in the 21st century. It's all down to that. And the other proxies of the West are the UAE. That's why when I hear black folk talk about on Instagram, ooh, I'm here in Dubai living my best life, and all that slave labor that's maintaining that stuff over there, And so, there's a lot of political education, and our people don't have good information. The UAE, the Arabs, they despise you. So the UAE, they're like the white people of the Gulf, So those are not your friends. So we got to get a little bit more sophisticated and learn who allies and friends are, and just be at peace with it, And so yeah, they're fighting. This is a battle for hearts and minds now, over the black imagination over the next 10 years. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Anderson. We got 2 minutes left. So if anybody got one last little short question, feel free. Now or never. Okay, cool. Well, Dr. Anderson, I appreciate you. This is the 9th interview I've done, and obviously, like I was telling you, I wanted more people to get involved with your work and just to think about Afrofuturism
All right.
outside of
Here's my closing statement, a way to think about this.
Okay.
It takes a system to oppose a system. The Cold War was about opposing systems. And after one of those systems, which was the Soviet Union, collapsed, that allowed globalization to happen. But now the system we were born in is coming to an end. But the new alternative system hasn't emerged yet. But every system in human history has a beginning and an end. Every one. There's no system that lasts forever. And so you got to think about, okay, I'm in this system. And then you just follow the breadcrumbs. What is the new system going to look like? And that'll help you under your decision making. So it ain't about political parties. It's not about this and the other. It's about one system that's arriving at the end of whatever it's about, and a new system that's still coming together. That's, in a very broad way, the easiest thing to think about what's happening to us now. It takes a system to oppose a system. And when one system is dying, there's a new system also emerging.
As quoted in Afrofuturism 2.0, Armageddon is already in effect. I want to thank you all for coming. And Dr. Anderson, obviously, I appreciate you taking the time to even chat with me. I'm hoping, again, from this interview and just even you all just getting a taste of Dr. Anderson, to see how Afrofuturism is just more than I think what has been sold to us under Black Boy Joy or Black Girl Magic. I think we're doing more than that. And I'm just feel like this is just hopefully a little sliver that gets folks who watch this or people on this call just interested in things outside of just the surface level. I feel like that is what I care about in terms of particularly Black writers, Black speculative writers, is not getting caught up in the sort of the hype of it all. And I think this is a one way to do that is really to take a hold of things. And words have meaning. It's not, people just didn't make up Afro and futurism and just was like, boom, 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 And so as I said, what does this mean for your world? What does this mean for what's coming? Or stories that are going to come out in the future? How are the kids either going to read or understand these things? Are we going to go back to shorthand? Most people don't even know what shorthand is. It's just so many different things to think about. And so I just hoping that just doing these sort of interviews with people who are contending with speculative on not just a literature level in terms of storytelling, help us expand some of our understandings or the ways in which that we approach these as authors or editors, ourselves. So again, I just want to thank everybody. I appreciate you, Dr. Anderson. And I'll talk to you all soon. I have some exciting new people that we're going to interview and try to really, just get more into this conversation about craft, about the future, about literature, about community and kinship as a whole. And hopefully this was enjoyable for you all as well. Again, Dr. Anderson, thank you. Okay, folks.
Thank you.
I'll see y'all soon.
All right.